Okay, so this video, in order to do this lesson, you should have already seen the lesson on the beading needles and their sizes, the threads, and the types of beads that we're using. And you should have a kit that it'll have one piece of like paper like this that might already have drawings on it because I'm reusing old stuff, and it'll say practice on it. So this lesson is it's not about looks, it's just about learning the basic stitch. And you're going to keep this because this is going to be kind of like your notes moving forward. Sorry, your notes moving forward on different stitches and things that you learn. So this is sort of like it's your practice sheet. Now you've got a spool of thread, and your thread's going to be white, but I'm using black thread because I want you guys to be able to see what I'm doing. And you should have a needle double threaded that you already did because you already did that video. There's a whole video on how to thread needles. So today this is just about the button. It's simply how to do the button. And then once you have the button on, I'll do another video on the back stitch and how to do the back stitch. So I'll quickly use my eyes are getting worse as I get older, and so I find that I need to use the magnifying glass to get anything done in terms of trying to thread needles and things. So my eyes are just not as good as they once were. And that happens when you're getting older. So anyway, you thread your needle, tie it off, all that. And I'm using a really short one because I've got so much gear on this table, and really I don't need a long one for this. But just to remind you that when you're a beginner beader, you're measuring out from the center to the end of your arm in terms of how much thread you want to be using when you first start out. So once you've got a basic knot, now this embroidery fabric, it's a little different from just putting a knot up through. So in order to start this one, what you're going to do, I'm going to flip this because that's kind of distracting. Let's call this the good part and ignore that. Somebody did something there. So normally you would go up from under, right? So your needle is always coming up from under. You always want all your extra threads and knots and stuff to be on the side that no one sees. So this embroidery fabric on the one hand is great because it has all these little holes and you can just pull it up. But if you pull too hard, those knots you made are just going to come through. So how do you fix that? Well, here's how. When you're anchoring, because you're just going to pick anywhere on this fabric to do this. It doesn't matter. Do it in the middle or around. Now I'm stabbing through a fold in the fabric on the bottom. I'm pulling it almost all the way through. So I get to the end, and there's this little loop, right, that's been formed by my knot. I'm going to insert my needle in the loop and pull it through. And when I pull it through, it will tie to itself. And then I'll come in and trim off this extra tail because it's really, really big tail. Let's make sure that you're trimming off the tail and not your actual thread that you want to use. So I'm getting rid of this right here, just to shorten it. Now this is nice and tight. It's not going to go anywhere. So you're ready to sew the button on. So this is incidentally, this has nothing to do with how you sew a button for a shirt. When you sew a button for a shirt, your button, where's my button? Here's my button. Your button on a shirt actually needs some room behind it to accommodate fabric. Lots of times if your buttons are popping out on shirts, especially cheap ones, it's because they sewed the button with a machine and the button is so tightly sewn to the shirt that there's no ease for the fabric to come in. So normally if I was sewing a button to be used as a button and not like a cabochon, I would put a toothpick or matchstick here and loop it, and it would end up being kind of loose. But you don't want to do that for this because this is just a substitute for a cabochon. So coming up from under, I stick it in the hole and pull it through. And actually you just let it fall. Now, to sew your button on, the reason that I have you using a button in the first place is you need to get used to manipulating fabric. I want you to get used to with your non-dominant hand, so for me that's my left hand. It's just as important as the hand that does the beading, my right hand. Because how I hold the fabric, especially when you're turning your beads and you're making circular things as we do in Woodlands territory, where we are, most of the forms are very curvilinear. And so like you're gonna be doing curves, and the way to do that is to get used and to not have to always look at your hands. Get used to pinching the fabric so that your thumb and whatever finger you use line up, so that when I'm underneath I don't have to see what I'm doing because I can just feel my way around, stab up and fine. Are you gonna bleed? Probably. Yeah, that'll happen when you're first learning to bead. And one of the reasons that we're learning beading, other than cultural reasons, is because it teaches you awareness of the edges of your fingers. There's a lot of manual dexterity that's involved in this, and it's really good for you to develop it. Like if you ever want to be a brain surgeon, I would prefer that you be a brain surgeon that knew how to use a needle before you operated on me, right? So anyway, when you're stabbing up and all that, you'll just get used to it. And, that's the other reason why you have your own needle kit and you don't share needles, right? Because eventually people end up kind of bleeding a little bit. So I'm going to stab down this way. Now back in the day, for whatever reason, they used to gender how they did sewing of buttons. So they would make the stitches on the buttons would depend on status, and sometimes on whether you were male or female. So in certain manufacturing things they would say, oh, like women had to use this pattern that I'm showing you right now, where you'll notice the thread is going from here to here, right? So I'm going to bring that up. So the thread is going like across and not making a crisscross, or they would only do outer garments. So there were all these little rules about that, but you do whatever works for you for this, right? So what you're doing is you're pinching the button, and you're kind of, for the next lesson, you're gonna need to be always keeping your finger and your thumb on that button. It's like your anchor point. Now I'll show you kind of slower what I was doing there, because you have to go over this several times. That's just one stitch. It's not gonna keep it on there. So you can look at it and kind of just stab your way through and find a hole. But before you pull up, like I found a hole, it's going in, make sure it's the hole you want to go in. So then when I look at it, it's like, oh, yeah, there it is. It is the hole I want. And then you pull it up through, and you're going to be going back down over the stitches that you already made. And sometimes it will get stuck on the edges of this fabric, especially if you have unwaxed thread. This thread is not waxed because I didn't send wax home with you guys. I don't have a ton of beeswax to spare. If you've got beeswax at home and you rub your thread on the nylon thread on the beeswax, it will snarl up like way less. So I'm holding on to this. Sometimes I'll hold on to it with this finger or this finger, depending. And if the fabric's getting in my way, I can just roll it up, right? I can roll it up out of my way. And that way I have better control over what I'm doing, and I can feel where I'm at. So I'm actually pinching this. This thumb is like lined up with this finger. So it sort of helps me find that hole. So I'm trying to find that hole, and I found it. But I'll do it again just to show you. So I want to find this hole this time, right? So I'm going to poke up, and sometimes you'll poke up and it'll be here, and that's fine. You just poke up again. Oh, look, I hit my finger. But I have like really callous thumbs now from so much beading. So I pull it through, and then I go over again. So like you're just going to go over probably like, I don't know, 4 or 5 times should do it on each hole kind of that you're choosing to do, so that it's fairly well anchored and that you can do it. I'm trying to angle it so you can see it, but then it's really hard for me to see it. So anyway, you're going to go through, you're going to angle it up. That's really hard to see. Can you see that? Yeah. So once you've done it a couple times, then you turn your fabric and you hold it and you make sure that you get it on the other one as well. So you're going to go up, pull through, and go over. And once you've done that a few times, you can check the security of your button by just kind of going, okay, it's not too wiggly. If you make it wiggly, the next lesson it's gonna get kind of screwy. Now, how do you tie off your thread? This is the trick, and you need to know this. So when you're done with a thread for any given reason, which you are totally done with this now, this is why I had you do a double thread, because this is the easiest way to tie off a thread that I can teach. And there's other ways I'll teach you when you get a little more advanced. So what you do is you take your scissors, you've got your doubled up thread, and you cut it. Woohoo, right? Make sure you put your needle somewhere where you're not going to sit on your needle if you're not continuing. So you can put it back with you where it belongs. Now here's the trick. We all know how to tie a granny knot or a square knot, right? So you tie a knot. You tie the two threads to each other. And by doing that, so if you went over this way, then you switch to go over this way, and that's what makes a square knot. So you pull it through, and we talked about knots in our last thing. Now that's pretty secure. And this is a really long tail that you don't really want. So you just trim it. Ta-da! You sewed a button. And the button should be, fairly stuck on there. And that is lesson 1.